Hey Derek, and welcome to the Picking Up Rocks podcast. Really glad to have you on today to talk a little bit about parenting, I suppose, and where it lands us today. I wanted to ask you off the cuff, we'll get into the details and why you're a good person to ask this, but can you define parenting for me? I'm a parent myself, but I feel like there's different definitions, but there's the right, I don't know. Could you just start with that?
Yeah, that's a great way to start. It's good to be here and good to have a conversation that's around this, but also quite different to the things I often do day to day. Parenting. Well, I'll start with a two points that I would come to my brain when I think about that question. Number one is uh, there's no such thing as a parenting expert. I often might be quoted or approached to sort of play that role. So do others in who work in the public kind of parenting advice space. They get called parenting experts, and I've always had a problem with that because to get to your actual question, how do you define something and then call somebody an expert on it if you accept that the thing parenting is actually many things. So how would I define parenting? Parenting is the I would say the things, the actions and behaviors that people carry out or have when they're caring for a child, whether that's their own biological child or a child that they're a carer of, if through another relationship. Parenting is made up of many actions and behaviors that are all about supporting that child's well-being and development. So parenting is nutrition things. Parenting is behavior guidance or behavior support for young kids and young adults. Parenting is daily hygiene. Parenting is safety, and parenting is communication activities and communication behaviors. It's so many things that I don't think you can define it neatly at all. And to say someone's a parenting expert is kind of saying they're a jack of all trades, master of none. Um, it was one of the thought I had about parenting. Oh yeah, I work at the Raising Children Network as a director there, but that network is actually made up of a couple of organizations. And the reason I say that is because in the Parenting Research Center, which is one of those organizations, we did explore this idea of parenting and what is it. And it helped us in one way. It helped us say there's something quite different between parent support and parenting support. Uh, we landed on this nice distinction. If you're doing parent support, you're supporting a person. They might have their own challenges, needs, and as a person, you're helping them in their life. But if you're supporting parenting, if you're involved in parenting support, you're supporting the job. You're trying to help a person or people with this job we call parenting, which I think is a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of activities and behaviors and um, capacities and skills that people learn on the job.
I think it's really refreshing to sort of hear you say that as someone who gets termed as a parenting expert, coming from a parent, when you're always looking for that, what is sort of parenting expertise, but to hear you sort of summarize that is refreshing considering where you sit. And I think it's very honest and open, and one of the big reasons why I wanted to get you on and sort of dissect it a little bit. And your lifespan speaks to sort of where we are. And like, I wanted to ask whether you feel like parenting has changed, or the concept or the asks of what a parent is over the years. Off the call, we spoke a little bit about you've been at your job for the last 20 years, so you've seen a lot of change. I think you sort of welcomed in digital pretty well there, and seen, I suppose, the attention economy really take hold. Has that changed the way parenting is happening, or the asks and sort of calls upon?
Uh, I think the change we see in the last 18, 20 years is in some ways really notable, but I would not say it's a change in parenting, uh,
Hmm.
or a change in the core asks of somebody who's doing this jack of all trades, master of none job called parenting. The reason I say that is often what we've heard from other researchers who look at how people look at parenting, and this idea of how we frame parenting. There's this frame that often gets brought to us or gets raised in the public conversation as the frame of kind of the threat of modernity. Um, and what that's saying is sometimes we have an assumption that that change and the things that are changing around us, let's say with the attention economy, is a really good example of something that's really had a lot of evolution over the last 10, 15 years. If things new like that are happening, we can often have this assumption or this feeling that it's not good. Um, it's a kind of a threat. New things are threatening to the status quo. And it's sometimes we're right to be, feeling a little bit, if not threatened, then dubious about change that's happening really fast. Sometimes we're right, and other times maybe we're just afraid of the unknown, and we're seeing new things and change as things in our way to live the way we would like to live. So that's a bit of a sideways answer going on about the threat of modernity. But I want to go back to the original thing. The thought is, has parenting changed?
Mm.
Given that parenting is a bit of behavior management or understanding behavior in children and doing your best to support their well-being, given that parenting is a lot about, daily care and emotional and social care, but also physical care, given that parenting is a bunch of different skills and capacities a person tries to develop, that hasn't changed. And the kind of core skills haven't changed. Um, the world is changing all the time. And some of the uh, help seeking behaviors are changing. So, where people are looking for help with their parenting, definitely changing. Some of the things that they are concerned about are changing. Like there's this new evolving online environment. There's a new AI environment. There's this. There's that. There's there's climate change. There's a lot of change going on in the world, which certainly comes into play for parents, like it does for anybody, any conscious citizen. Those things are changing a lot, and they're coming into the sphere of a person who's doing parenting. But I would table the idea that parenting itself hasn't changed a great deal. It still really comes down to care and support of young children and then older children into adulthood, which in terms of the brass tacks hasn't changed a great deal.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you there. The job hasn't changed, but maybe where you do the job has changed in a way.
Yeah, and maybe some of the tools you have for the job have changed a bit, and with the world changing in some big ways and some small ways. Yeah, the place where you do the job is changing, but you're still trying to pretty much do the same job. It's just the environment's fluctuating around you.
How does the Raising Children Network sort of combat sort of this post-truth or this era where information is coming from so many different places? We do live in an attention economy, and a lot of, I don't know, lack of a better word, influencers can build whether
Mm,
it's not a business model off telling people how to live, with
yeah,
off arguably sort of uh, not necessarily the most credible background. Some are doing their best, others maybe have more scrupulous intentions. And how does the Raising Children Network sort of combat that, see it as an opportunity to be able to exist in that space differently? Have you had to evolve around the dissemination of that information? And I suppose where you meet parents today, because it feels like parents have a lot more coming at them constantly, but that could be just my imagination because I'm a parent today.
No, look, I think it's not your imagination. It's uh, parents or anybody who's connected to modern media in any way has a lot coming at them, parents included. So, in terms of how we combat that, well, we thankfully, with the help of government funding, we never had to prioritize engaging people and winning them over with our messages. We had the ability and the funding to develop messages with the goal to translate what's reliably known. So, what we know from research, what we know from practice, what we know from maternal child health nurses, what we know from practitioners in social work, what we know from what works. So, we've always, to combat this sort of more recent, but always present challenge of unreliable answers, we've been able to prioritize knowledge translation. What do we know about this topic, whatever it is? What do we reliably know because the knowledge has been in some way tested or put to the test in community? And once we identify that, okay, that's what we'll translate. We'll turn those messages into engaging and simple messages for parents. So that's our model, and we do it through working with those knowledge holders. My team has no researchers and no experts in nutrition, behavior, safety. What we do is we go to our network, 400 or more experts in those areas. They sit down with us and they help us draft the messages for parents. Then other experts review those things in a peer review kind of approach, sign off that we're not saying anything that isn't reliably backed. Then we go to another few stages of sign off, and then we publish. So a shorter answer is, going back to influencers or disinformation or misinformation, often those things are happening because engaging is the main goal.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, people can monetize that really wonderfully, and it becomes a fantastic business model. But it's engagement is the primary goal, and then the secondary goal is to communicate something that may be useful. And that's a different model. It's very effective, though. One thing I think is quite enviable in that space is that when you're in that model of, let's say, a one individual model, influencer model, or another model where it's an expert advisor who's being paid for their advice in a particular platform, whatever the situation, the enviable thing is it's quite relatable. So people love to feel like they have a relationship. In clinical care settings, often the relationship means just as much as the clinical care. The relationship that you have with somebody means an awful lot when that somebody's trying to help you. So what influencers and people who offer that model have is they have the ability to form a relationship with you that you feel is real and feel it's special. Even though you're one of 4 million, it feels like it's for you. And that's quite impressive because it means that you will listen, that engagement has worked because it really feels like it's personal. So how do we combat that is a good question. So what we're going to do next with our model is to look at bringing the evidence back and bringing reliable knowledge into that kind of format. So a conversation can happen between a parent and one of our network kind of knowledge holders. That's a reliable, safe place of information sharing and doesn't prioritize engagement. It tries to marry engagement with information that's reliable. So to put it really bluntly, Patrick, we're now looking at how what we do will now look in social media's platforms like TikTok and Instagram. And how will it be similar and how will it be different to what's going on there already?
Yeah, they're really valuable challenges, and I feel like that's where parents are reaching out and trying to find a bit of help. It's sort of the go-to place where news is coming in. I think Have you noticed that pushback around institution, that some people push back against known institution?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah. Luckily, we're seeing ourselves as not so much an institution, but an independent, reliable
yeah,
source. But I have seen, and I think we see it in media too. There has been a sort of an erosion of the institution. There's been an erosion of the expert. There's been a sort of a growing, um, kind of unfortunate kind of pushback, as you say, against different kinds of institutions without being very discriminating. You know, it's if an institution is seen as may perhaps if an institution is seen as untrustworthy, then it's sort of other institutions get labeled kind of guilty by association. I think is something that happens. But yeah, I think, and maybe it's part of healthy society development that you question authority and you question institutions. I think it is.
mm,
But I think the tricky thing for us to do as people is to try to be discerning, or to make that discrimination between, okay, I'm now why is it I have less trust here than there? And am I checking my logic on that? Um, I say to my own teenage children, if you're consuming messages, always take a moment to think, where is this coming from, and why is it that I'm happy with this as opposed to another source?
mm. There's such valuable messages to distill in everyone, I think,
Yeah,
not just young, but yeah, essentially. And sometimes I feel like the young are way more astute into the sort of discerning what is what, and sort of how to read that. And I think that also changes the playing field of how to sort of reach, hate the word, but authentically, and sort of
yeah,
meet people. And that tone of voice of being a bit vulnerable seems to be eeping in, and maybe for the better in sort of expert field where people can find that relating, and how to dial back the language and bring in more, which is tricky when you're delivering evidence-based education.
I, I have the same thought, Patrick, and I was thinking maybe part of the answer here is we want that empathy, we want that voice. We everybody agrees now that lived experience and the voice of everyday life needs to be in there. Otherwise, you'll fall for other forms of authenticity. Yeah, not real authentic, just quite engaging.
Yeah.
So maybe I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think maybe one answer to go forward with is we find ways to marry real
Mm.
voice, authentic voice of experience and date real life, marry it in the conversation with a peer voice, which is coming from a place of knowledge holder. More of an expert, or again, there's that word expert, but somebody who's bringing particular kind of knowledge into the conversation, which is knowledge of empirical research or whatever. And then you have another voice in the same conversation, which is the voice of um, authentic, relatable everyday life. And you mix those voices together in a cocktail shaker. And at the end of the day, you've done more good than harm.
100%. I think that dance that you're talking about there in that cocktail is something that sort of livens that and speaks to the medium that it has to go out in there, to see sort of that to and fro, and lessons being learned on both fronts. I think that's what people are.
Yeah, shared learning. Yeah, on both fronts. I think one lovely definition I heard about co-design. Everybody loves co-design because of this. Is that it's finding solutions across difference.
Mm,
You bring difference into this space. We are different. We have different knowledge sets, and we work together on a common solution. That sounds nice to me because it means you have the opportunity for more than one or two or three voices, but you're all heading in the same
mm.
general
Yeah,
direction.
brains tingling just thinking about certain parenting group have real specific needs or worries, and they really turn to you, Derek, there at the Parenting Network, and sort of help form a course or form the basis of a course, and that goes out and how you capture that, and you could see the real impact that happens there, because parents are definitely, um, struggling. They always do, I feel. That's part of the parental narrative and part of the lessons that come out of, or the richness that exists in being a parent, I feel. And that maybe hits on your parenting journey. I really want to touch on how you landed in your parenting journey and what pushed you into your work that you've been doing, and why it's landed you where you are.
Yeah, look, I'm really happy to be um, really honest about this because it starts quite unexpectedly, right? So if I go back to my 20s, I'm in Dublin. I was in Dublin until I was 30. I grew up there. So I'm in Dublin when I'm in my 20s. I have no intention of having children. In fact, I had all these quite strong held thoughts and beliefs about why I would not have children. Um, and to use a cliche, then I met somebody. I met the right person. So go forward a couple of years. I'm now living in Australia. I'm 32, whatever. I have a first child with my then partner, my wife. Then a year later, 2 years later, I have a second child, and I'm now a 30-something person living in Melbourne, looking for work in this area of translating knowledge. So I've been trained in kind of knowledge translation or just communicating knowledge that comes from research places rather than knowledge that comes from celebrity or somewhere else. So I'm working in that kind of area, and I've got two little kids. And when the day that my second child was born, I had started working already on this thing called Raising Children Network. And when she was born, it was the same week that we launched Raising Children Network. So that's 18 years ago. So that's a helpful metric because I now, as what we do has evolved and the website has grown and grown, I watch this person also evolve and grow. And it's amazing the parallels, when we covered various topics, I was dealing with it at home at the same time. I then separated from my partner after 10 years together and repartnered. And then I had 3 new stepchildren in my life. So my 2 girls and 3 stepchildren as well. So we were then a blended family. And I was still working at Raising Children Network. And we were publishing content on blended families and separation and co-parenting. And then I was in that scenario for another 10 years. So my second 10 years in Australia, I'm in a blended family setup with my partner and our kids. Then all the kids have grown up into young adulthood. So they're all 5 are sort of 19, 20, 21 age range and are out in the world and doing their thing. And here I am, not at the end of parenting. It, of course, never ends. Here I am parenting young adults in my life, who I have in my life, and I'm still working at Raising Children Network in terms of supporting people through that kind of journey. So that's been my sort of story, but it has been kind of strange and funny how we developed content around, for example, gender and gender identity, when at the same time as my young adolescent children were going through some, journeys around gender and identity. So it's lots of parallels. But what I won't say, Patrick, is that I've always taken my work home and, walked the walk. I might go to work and talk the talk, but you're not always able to walk the walk because, as everybody knows, with parenting, some days you're winning and some days you're not winning so much.
I think it's so refreshing to hear that. As a parent, I think often it's painted as, you're going to be the perfect parent or whatever, and I think it just doesn't exist. You can strive to be, and that's admirable, but to let yourself know that is big, and to hear yourself speak to that. But that's a fascinating piece. I didn't realise that about yourself, Derek, that you really have lived with that. I suppose you've got a 6th child, which is the parenting network there.
Yeah.
As it's grown up. Impressive to hear that you've been at the helm and sort of grown with that? And pulling it back and putting it on the personal, what has been your biggest challenge as a parent that you felt like putting your professional hat away? Like, what have you
Yeah,
found that?
yeah, very very happy to put aside the professional because it's often what I'm speaking to. On a personal note, well, firstly, I'd just like to echo what you said. Often we can feel like there's pressure to be a really good parent or even the perfect parent, and that's unfortunate. That's a public conversation we need to change. Um, I think it's a better conversation to say we learned this on the job, and it is something you learn. And if you need, everybody needs support sometimes. At some point, everybody needs help with the job, and you just head towards that north star. You do your best towards that north star with the best support you can find, and you head that direction. And you have good days and bad days, bumpy waters and still waters along the way. As for me, the bumpier waters, what has been more tricky to navigate for me, I suppose, let me just think. Yeah, I think when my children got to the age of sort of 16, 17, I, I think it was quite challenging just to figure out how to hold that tension between two roles that I was trying to play. One is the supporter and carer, and the other is the kind of uh, mentor who's allowing them out into the world. So I think this is probably lots of parents, especially in teen years. How, to what extent am I here to um, continue to do what I did when they were younger, which is really hands-on care, versus let go and allow that independence to develop, even when it's scary.
Mm, that letting go, hey? Is a,
Yeah, because you never can. It's a bit of a oxymoron. We learn to let go, and that's what we do to support them. But you actually don't ever really. It's impossible. So instead, you just step back a bit and make sure I would say to my kids, right here, you're here. But you're there, and you've got to do that thing. You got to do what you're doing. You got to make mistakes, and I've got to be ready for that. And it's scary. It's scary because it's sort of like I remember saying once, it's sort of like handing a toddler a chainsaw, and you're saying, "Okay, I'm going to be over here, but you're going to learn. You're going to learn how to work this, but I'll be right here." It's a bit that's extreme, but the sensation is a bit like that. I'm here, and I've got your back if you need me. But go do the things you need to do to learn some lessons.
and growing and yeah, it's such a journey. I'm only like six years into it with two children myself, and
Yeah, but
yeah,
the toddler years, I think you probably have experienced a bit of this already, maybe a lot of it, because there's two big pushes for independence. It's the toddlers and the teens. They look a bit different, and they look a bit different, and the environment's different where they do it, but the impulse is the same. It's like, I need to go do this for myself now, and you need to let me.
100%. Phil is youngest is definitely feeling that, and it's almost like a proud moment, but it's a challenging moment as well as a parent. Is
Yeah,
you just feel the foot go down. Such quite a sensitive soul, but it's quite beautiful to see. But in the throes of parenthood and everything else that life is asking of you, sometimes it's you can view it as an inconvenience, but you've got to pull yourself out. Well, I find myself, I've got to pull myself out and be like, wow, this is like, a bit of a moment here, and it's pretty cool to see. But
yeah,
some days it's pretty hard to see it with that sort of eagle eye. You're definitely in there.
very hard. Yeah.
And it's unique. But yeah, that's really fascinating to hear how you've worked through and with the research network too, and the parenting research network, and grown with that. It's where do you see it sort of in the future? How do you envisage it playing out?
In terms of like my relationship with that work, you mean?
Yeah, your relationship with it, but then also as the organisation in and of itself, I think you'd be well placed
Mm.
to sort of see that role that it gives to society as it transitions and moves and grows and evolves,
Yeah,
because you've been so for so long.
that's a great question. If I think about, how might that work, how that space, that workspace change? Raising Children Network or the Parenting Research Center that sits behind Raising Children Network, or the other organization I should mention is the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, very big institute that sits right behind Raising Children Network. That's where the team is. That's where the people
Mm.
are doing the work. How might it all evolve and change? I think the way it might land or change in the next 5 or 10 years is I think we'll probably take that definition of parenting and all the different ways we can support it, and we'll embrace how diverse it really is. So, for example, I can imagine it landing in a broader definition, a broader space where we truly recognize the diversity in families. We truly recognize how people learn uh, parenting on the job, but in many, many different ways. So the ways we support them will be very, very mixed, different ways of supporting the job. And I think I think one thing that will probably also bubble up to the surface and change over the next while is uh, the real priority we put on young children's emotional well-being. It's already a big priority in some sectors, but I think supporting how young children are going emotionally uh, and socially earlier than we used to in a professional work, I think will be a big focus because it'll help so many ways with avoiding challenges later on for them. The last thing I would mention is I think there's going to be a real need for us to focus more on caring, not just for kids, but for parents. Oh, there's a child right now.
Thank you, Billy. That's my youngest. Good timing, Derek. She's just given me some fennel from the garden.
Oh, lovely.
It's her latest dessert. Thank you, darling.
Yum, yum. I love fennel.
It's her offering. It's very sweet from
Yeah.
the garden. Appropriately, sorry to cut your train of thought there. You were wrapping
I
up.
was just chipping in one other thought, which aside from those kind of things that might alter in the future, I was thinking about caring for older generations, caring for our parents, um,
Mm,
caring for our elders. Um, is
that's
not
interesting.
it's not parenting, but in ways there's a lot of similarities. Because caring is caring,
Mm,
and caring for our older generations and caring for our own parents has again a mixed bag of different things inside that. So while you wouldn't call it parenting, you would call it a really important area of caring. And I think that's going to be a big change where we do a lot more work in that space. And
mm,
professional, the needs for support are already growing in that space. I don't know about you because your children are a bit younger, but a lot of people my age are in a dual role. They're parenting their children who are getting older, and they're also really caring, doing a lot of active caring work for the older family members. And there's a lot more support in the first one.
that's really interesting that you say that. And to bring it from the top, I love the fact that you sort of tied that up with how diverse parenting is, and it's really refreshing to hear that that's the direction that you're seeing hold validity there, because there is no rule book to parenting, but I think shared stories and sharing perspective is what people are craving as sort of the construct of the village is being reimagined as we
Yes.
go forward. It takes a village to raise children, and everyone asks that in those early years, like where is the village, what that is, and I think it's an interesting. I think that the network plays a big role, or has a chance to continue to play that bigger role, and to hear that evolution is really refreshing in that space. But then your last point there around parenting in reverse and having to do it, at the same time, that's a really unique challenge, but actually not that unique. As you say, there's a lot of people who exist in that cohort,
Yeah.
and more and more. That's a space that you can see a lot of work to be done, and a lot of questions in that space, and a lot of help that could go a long way, especially as people better understand their mental health and the requirements around, and sort of juggling this and that. It's a
Yeah.
space. So.
On that village note, there's a wonderful academic called Tim Moore, and he's based at the Centre for Child Community Health. He's presented a wonderful concept. I've seen it more than once around the village, as you say, but the way he frames it based on the evidence is this notion of social climate change. So the environment, right? The environment changing, but not the natural environment or the climate in that sense, but the social climate has changed. Yeah. So the village is not the same village that we would have known 20 years ago. And parents, for example, raising children for their first child and they've never changed a nappy, or seen somebody change a nappy, or families living in more isolation because of suburban sprawl, blah blah blah. These are just examples of how the social climate has changed and is still changing. So there's fascinating kind of aspect to the changing world where we do the job of parenting.
That is, I want to dig in on that. That is a fascinating one, that social change. And it leads to sort of, we've got three more questions, and that is around, this is a big one, but if you were to build from a personal perspective, being a parent and also your professional, it's a blend. There's this term eco-anxiety. I think it's growing, it's changing, it's moving, but it's this construct. There's a narrative out there at the moment that the world is ending, and how kids are evolving in that space as they consume that content. For me, and a lot of the studies out there are sort of saying that is leaving kids to not have a sense of agency in that. And I'd be really curious to hear your perspective on, and maybe there are programs that exist that sort of look to tackle that and build a sense of agency and build a sense of, that things can change for the better. How do you do that? And how do you start to build a voice for the young, where it feels like they're not inheriting something that's going to die, but inherited something that they feel like they have power to change or to work with?
Well, it's a big one, yeah. And I do have a couple of thoughts without being an expert on either the climate change itself or climate anxiety. We do work with people in those fields. So yeah, right. So I think there's two thoughts. One is, when it comes to anxiety of any kind around, say, the environment and feeling no agency to do something about it, or anxiety to do with other things like other natural disasters, or troubling events in the news, geopolitics, or what's happening in the public, anxiety around safety, whether it's sexual safety for young adults or other kinds of safety in the community. All these kinds of anxiety are real. And I think, so I've got two thoughts. One is, when it comes to managing anxiety and work and help children feel more positive around what they are witnessing or learning, there's obviously lots of positive strategies we can look to there, and many programs focus on, how we can support children just dealing with feelings of anxiety or negative feelings of any kind, to work through those by building up in practical ways, building up ways to think around your own thoughts and get support to manage those negative thoughts, whatever they're about. My second thought is going more specifically to this climate anxiety. There's some really nice programs evolving now, and we're working with some of the experts in this space, Lisa Gibbs at Melbourne Uni has a team working on a school-based program. I think it's called Climate Bugs or
Mm.
Resilient Bugs. I have to check, but that's a program that focuses in on young people who are at school and really goes for a programmatic approach to building their own positive agency and outlook on climate through small and big actions. Um, and I think with programs like that, and I was at the National Disaster Resilience Conference last week in Sydney. And at that Disaster Resilience Conference, we had lots and lots of presenters, but a number of them focused on community resilience and how you build it,
Mm.
and how you build it around community concerns. And surprise, surprise, a lot of them were recommending you go with co-design. You build programs and initiatives in conversation with those who are right there in that setting, and that includes children. So I
Mm.
think I think there's a lot of space and movement happening in this resilience building. Resilience gets thrown around a lot as a word, but in this context, we're talking about resilience in communities and in families and in children's resilience at different levels to help work through those kinds of anxieties in constructive ways. And so those two thoughts are what come to my mind. General positive parenting support for raising children who have those anxieties. And the second one is how, yes, there are some actual programs evolving that go straight to that climate anxiety space. But one last thought I have is just a throwaway line. I think that lovely message we often hear: think global but act local. I think in there's a lovely message for kids
Mm.
because to be aware and conscious of what's happening on a large scale is one thing, and we need to do that and have work through our feelings about that. But in terms of what's happening to really make you feel agency, it's what you did yesterday. It's what you think you might do tomorrow. And that means in your postcode, and that means in your family.
Yeah, no, I really like that, and it speaks strongly to the argument for co-design in that space and meet kids where they are. I really like
Yeah.
that. And I think there is a lot of work that can be done there. I appreciate you sharing a detailed answer in that. I think you're a really well positioned person to share that there, and it adds to the growing list. And this came off the back of a friend of mine news that they were going to have a baby, and his father saying, "Oh, you're believers in the future." And I just thought that was so striking, that is a sentiment that exists out there at the moment, and something that newborns are coming into the world under that assumption is quite a is quite a weight. The kids have to bear in there. There's something that we do. It's a bit of a tradition. It's a borrowed tradition, but I have a question for you from past guests. What's the scariest thing that you haven't done yet but want to do?
Oh, good one. Scariest thing I haven't done yet but want to is learn to drive a car.
Yeah.
I don't drive. But now, as time passes, it feels like less of a reason to do it. Lots of reasons not to do it. But I've never done that because I never needed one in Ireland and then just didn't use one here in Melbourne. So there you go.
Oh, that's a good one. It's an attainable one. Yeah, that's
I'm sure
interesting.
many Aussies will laugh at me for that one.
Aussies laugh at anything they can find humorous or get offended by that. Um, what's the question that you would like to pass on
Uh, a question from me to who?
to another guest? The
Ah,
idea is
okay.
you have no idea who they'll be, but it's just a
Yeah, I
question.
like that. Okay, great fun. What question will I pass on? I'll pass on the question: what do you think is one very true thing that others would say about you?
Love it. Derek McCormack, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk about parenting with you and all things that come in with it. Thanks for being so open and honest about it, and meeting us in the middle.
My pleasure, and I hope we, from your perspective,